am so glad you could come to the reading that Cedar Sigo is going to give, and a question-answer period followed by a book signing. We're thrilled you're here. I really want to thank the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art for being such gracious hosts, and I want to thank the Fletcher Bay Foundation and the Suquamish Foundation for underwriting our creative residency program at Bloedel Reserve, along with a few others who prefer not to be named. So Cedar, which is why you're here, I have a feeling a lot of you know a lot about Cedar already, and I don't have to really tell you a whole lot about Cedar. So I thought, what would I say? Well, our residency program has to do with the connection between nature and what it is to be human, basically, and how nature is an inspiration and how our environment cues and feeds what we do. And that's how our residents come to us, is wanting to work on that connection, or they've already established that connection, and it's a place to nurture it. So you never know somebody till you meet them, right? And I don't know the residents till they come. But when Cedar got here, I thought, yes, Cedar is a perfect person for this program, because a lot of people can work hard, a lot of people can persevere, have a goal in mind, go for it, but not that many people have that sort of extra, almost like antenna or something that sucks in what's around them, that notices the universe and is able to let that stew and then come out in a different form. And in Cedar's case, it's words that flow like paintings. I mean, it's remarkable, his writing, and I'm sure most of you have read some of it, and if you haven't, you'll hear some of it, and we do have books afterwards that Cedar will sign. So with that, I'm honored to have met Cedar, and that he is part of the Bloedel Reserve Creative Residency Program, and I'm going to turn it over to Cedar, because he's who you're here for. Thanks.
Okay, let's see what this situation is. Okay. I don't know. It's always like snake charming doing this. How does this sound? Okay? Could I be this far away? Okay. Thank you. I just want to thank my sister Robin, and I want to thank Amy and Brian and Joshua and Simon. And tonight, it's true, I had a book come out a few days ago called Siren of Atlantis, and I will read from that, but I thought it might be nice to read a little from Guard the Mysteries, which is a compendium of 5 lectures and happens to be in sentences. Some people seem to love that. Like they like to be strapped into something. And because my mom is here and some of my family, I thought I would read from the first lecture called Becoming Visible. And I sort of talk about being from around here and trying desperately to get away. I don't really cover coming back, but let's see. I guess this is fine. My father, Charles Sigo, is a photographer, and for a time was the curator-archivist for the Suquamish Museum. My mother, Lynn Ferguson, is a musician, specifically a singer. Both of them have always kept to a high personal standard, as well as maintaining a depth of belief in the arts. They allowed for a romantic tradition. Being an artist seemed to be more about continuous practice and execution rather than blindly applauding every effort. In Suquamish, certain artists would hurry into assigning themselves the title of master carver, painter, singer. My parents would sometimes joke about this. My mother seemed obsessed with the architecture behind the singing voice. She often spoke of diction, pitch, and phrasing, and pointed out when singers held too much tension in their voices. But she would also take care to point out those musicians who offered an uncanny personal style, one that can break rules and render them useless, as in the later Billie Holiday recordings of the 50s. Is our idealized voice, in fact, a ruin? wherein the knowing of the instrument eventually transcends its physical strength. She was always beholden to her first voice teacher, George Peckham. She kept a notebook of his sayings. I met him once or twice when I was 8 or 9 and played around in his house and backyard when my mother came into the city for a lesson, a tune-up. It seemed an unfastening, really, or granting of permission. I remember when he died, I attended the funeral. His daughter Lucy played a solo cello piece. The hall was so crowded with singers, and no one sang a note. My father put together the Eyes of Chief Seattle exhibit for the Suquamish Museum in 1983. His own photographs of reservation life in the early 1980s were hung alongside prints of Edward Curtis, same location and people, but without the Victorian staging. He had the archive situated behind the museum, cataloging baskets, stone artifacts, and binders of contact sheets. He and my mother both conducted interviews with the Suquamish elders when the tribe had been awarded an oral history grant in 1980. My mother edited our tribal paper for years. Despite their highlighting of Suquamish history, they never cast our struggle as belonging to the past. In fact, their message seemed to be that misfortune often arises whenever we stop struggling. My father organized our annual powwow, Chief Seattle Days, as well as an indoor art fair every spring. Chief Seattle Days has been celebrated every year since 1911. My father has always kept his hair long to his waist, but he never claimed to be the most traditional, to know the most songs or dances, or rush to summarize our history. It seemed he would rather leave it open-ended. At the same time, he also kept a black and white record, a family tree for the Sigo family, hand-drawn and typed and taped together, which still hangs on the long wall of his living room. I have always thought my father's photography seemed in line with Robert Frank, maybe even Larry Clark a bit. There was a dark room at the Tribal Center located just off of the archives. I remember being very young, maybe 5, and waiting outside until my dad said I could come in, and being bathed in the red light. Let's see how the light plays out. That seemed to be his premise. Plus, documenting our intimate and ever-evolving Suquamish history. That gesture dates well in photography, provided you have an eye. The interiors of my father's house and mine are almost identical. We laugh about it now. LPs, flyers, hand-drawn by friends and framed, seasonal shrines. The act of assemblage, breathing softly in well-appointed rooms. Reading prose is hard. I like skating around better. Let's see. Okay. It was hard to keep up with him when things really took off. My sometimes confidant and mentor in poetry, compression and purity. Why do I hate this so much? Okay. Let's see. It was hard to keep up with him when things really took off. My sometimes confidant and mentor in poetry, compression and purity. He would often send postcards, though we resided in the same city. He would scribble simple things such as sigh or bottle brush bush. I did catch up with him occasionally. The night he read to a packed, entranced Grace Cathedral, the sound of the sea and tangled grass beneath his words, waves in retreat giving body to the lyric. I was invited to the dinner after, surrounded by society I hadn't expected, art dealers with younger lovers in tow. He never blushed to be the center of attention. He held forth willingly on Rimbaud, precision and precarity, the poetics of the exposed nerve, and finally, the dragon and the unicorn, being distant relatives terribly missed. He was certain they were still just being detained in China. The word extinction was never uttered, as it might have killed the mood. The table sort of darted and danced around his love life. We only wanted more clues as to his underlying music, verse of this order being nearly extinct itself. I strive for assemblage, a rain-wilted Satanism, books of an undetermined enunciation. I still love the old world, he said, his breath blowing out a candle on the wall. I don't feel so alone late at night. This book is like 10 years old. Hot water music, and this is for Brian. There is the lute player in the tree and the thinnest purple dragonflies, different from the zebra flecked antennae of our last little wandering. And again, giant white pods have fallen from the trees in 2012 space odyssey-like proportions. The old Roman cavalcade baths are emptied now to dusty, rusted frescoes, the tincture of which has completely wasted my ability to walk forward, out from the shadow of the dome. Cause least harm, do what thou wilt. Write jokes down for the Oscars, Indian in the Indian earth. I got us a sweet and two-lane blacktop, dark with candied orange and cloves. Wings and feelers, eyeballs of the bees are grilled out in the open court. Amber gates and worried songs deflected nightly with your hand mirror. Bird calls cutting each other off on a mixtape. We drank another pint and ate the salmon and slept like logs. I don't know how I lose my place. This book is like 40 pages. 38. 34. Things to do in Suquamish. Smoke salmon. Call San Francisco, like totally. Get driven to the terminal. Escape. Come back after dark and feed the horses. Alfalfa, Timothy, oats, pick their hooves. Visit the Suquamish Museum. The eyes of Chief Seattle are shut, his spirit to himself. Sepia tones, baskets, white hot rocks, cobalt trade beads. Say hi to all my cousins. Cul-de-sac. Hi, Josh. Hi, Jeremy. Drink Rainier beer. A red ribbon out, up, and over the peak. I confuse it with Mount Fuji. Walk back to Dad's room. He talks when he wants and smokes. Linger over his bookshelf. Moby Dick, Starling Street, all of Kurt Vonnegut. Try and write the serial killer light at night. See through, green and black. Give up. Try prose. Oh, yeah, and this lecture, I wanted to read a little from this lecture about a poet named Joanne Kiger. And I don't know if I can read that right now. Maybe I'll read about Robert Creeley instead. Seems safer. Yeah, more poetry propaganda. Let's see. This is me talking about one of my favorite poets, Robert Creeley. One of those poets, like your first poet that you like fall in love with, and then you go read a million other poets, and then you go back to that one that you loved when you were 16. And so when I was writing this book, I thought, well, I have to put him in here. So this cuts in right after I put in this brilliant poem of Creeley's, but I'm not going to make you suffer through that. The poem seems to be charting a fit of haunted rhyming music. Creeley is chasing a description of what goes on when the language presents itself as malleable or driven purely by music. It is a sort of literal charting, except that the phrasing and the feeling are almost always at the mercy of the actual performance, the tone of the room as well as the audience. Creeley once related at an early reading, he came off the stage after what he considered to be a good performance, only to find the person seated next to him, patting him on the back, trying to comfort him, assuming that he had been a nervous wreck, entirely short of breath. Creeley was forced to say explicitly, "No, I want the poems to sound like that." In a 1988 documentary on Creeley by Diane Christian and Bruce Jackson, the poet speaks of going into a space one would ordinarily associate with musical composition rather than written verse. And this is Creeley speaking. My sense is that it's a human capacity or capability or possibility that occurs much in the same way that someone's ability to sing. I mean, you can train it. You can train it by practice and attention, but you paradoxically can't determine what it's going to do. I'm not sure that all poets experience these bracing fits of musicality, or they may experience this energy as fleeting. I sometimes feel as though I live in the sanctum of my inner ear, die nightly for a change of style. I have tried to duplicate the way Clark Coolidge leans into his abstractions, wearing them down so severely that his use of syntax becomes a sort of guardrail, or how Eileen Myles continually carves out their own colloquial shoulder of the lyric. The poet has to work each and every time to hollow out that space within their performance. There are only so many bars or syllables available with which to make your statement. Robert Creeley's tone is revealing in the same way Billie Holiday's singing style arrests us. It catches our ear. The event of the poem is drawn out syllable by syllable. Fire delights in its form is another great Creeley quote via William Blake. Why does Creeley's halting gestural way appeal to me? I realized fairly recently that all the tics and stutters and heavy breaths are in fact the mortar of any given reading, bristling at points. This long unwinding of the song and its mortar have been expanded upon throughout the writing of Eileen Myles, a poet who has gone ahead to expand even that narrow space in which we speak between poems. Myles has written so well of what being courted by the poem actually feels like. The following passage is lifted from an essay at the end of their 1991 collection, Not Me, an essay titled How I Wrote Certain of My Poems. The process of the poem, the performance of it I mentioned, is central to an impression I have that life is a rehearsal for the poem, or the final moment of spiritual revelation. I literally stepped out of my house that night, feeling a poem coming on. Incidentally, it hadn't started raining yet, so I wasn't alone in being ready to burst. I was universally pent up. I had done my research pretty unconsciously, celebrating the mood I was in. I've had this feeling before of going out to get a poem, like hunting. The night that comes to mind is the night I wrote the earlier poem. I felt erotic, oddly magnetic, like photographic paper. As I walked, I was recording the details. I was the details. I was the poem. Yeah, so this is the new book, Siren of Atlantis. And I guess I'll read back to front. Not too long. This is called The Pursuit. We stomp in as they all turn. We drop our bunch of daisies, paper, and string onto the floor. The lovers, a double-girded myth at my rough sleeve, where the usual sets of syntactic arrangement await a sleepless timbre. Thin and melodious melodrama, but kept without occlusion, a spiral showing off passage. Seems like all my work is commissioned now, like I'm being embalmed. Or John Wiener's once writ, girdled in gold. I become taxed a bit more at Land's End, forgetful. A neglected gown gone to scrap through daylight's sordid window. The gold of doll's hair, a pair of scratches I had tried to sweep up. Painting the flame-eating velvet retardant back onto mountains of crowns, a largely crooked offing. The sun stands pliant. We hung its canopy silk overhead to steady the lens during contact. The darkening of the doorframe, we hope to catch that, the want that is present. Follow me down through the locks to pick each lily as sharpened, the pinning of the sandpaper hat to the ace. Dreams replay through the pick in a line, its armor each to its own internal breezeway. His shadow hides one shoulder cut out from the dark, hand-held rasp with sky sprung, stars embarrassed. I stumble onto a quiver. There is no key. And this is the title poem, Siren of Atlantis. I've strayed too far off the block for mine own kind, and writing is not necessarily editing right now if it's the amusement of disguise over disappearance. If it's become all about dressing well and getting back to gallerists while still in my plucked helmet storming about. Is it a generative loneliness? Like rebuilding my body within a passage of light? Is this the right key for the empty apartment? Jay is reading Valerie Larbeau in A Tangle of Light at springtime. Which specific title escapes my vision, but the platinum tip of my tail is underwriting every emotive and syllabic outburst. Every instance of enraged punctuation and jealousy over not sleeping over, where there was no intended manger to begin with, where I am to be aired out prior to introduction, privy to his incredible feats of disappearance carried off in the alleyways of a Greenpoint night. I bow my staff upon a skinned knee, happy to be a so-called songwriter again, a little something coming in, whisking it all up, draped in fat lines down a dark room, slamming shut the so-called atmosphere of music. Oh, thanks. Really peeling through the water here. Let's see, what else? Okay, this is a poem called A Spiral and a Star in memory of Diane de Prima. Driftwood, bright white, turns the flame blue at its base. Diane's slight shake and dry mouth. I watched her turn young again, and then a bit drawn and whimsical as we became reacquainted. Put to work at her bedside, transcribing tiny new revolutionary letters, dawn poems, snares that are set to explode across centuries, into further collapse. Dream after Christ Church, after Freddie Mercury writhing up against your ear. Turn heretic and teach me the changes, elated, deep in dream, where I might find you turning again, slender to the night. And I'm going to close by reading this kind of notebook poem called Saint of the Abyss. But I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll just sort of dodge in and out, read all the good parts. And it starts with a quote by Joanne Kiger, which I think I can handle reading out loud. And that quote is, "Well, I myself am not myself." I think I had my stroke just to get out of reading for free with $1,000,000 paintings on the walls. My favorite work of art, an eagle feather fallen from the sky, complete with the first gesture to bend and lift it off the ground, bead and hang it upside down. Poetic gestures of internment or straight up tagging onto the walls, under non-reflective glass in frames in font, words carved in reverse through the screen with hauntingly long trains of gowns and the blood tapered through the underbrush. Our installation to hint at its continuous river stepping in and out is an event, a storyboarded comic we want recreated as ephemeral, but still printed, names, more internment, language tossed onto the page as a weapon asleep. That was simply one afternoon spent bent down, scribbling, entirely focused and entwined with space. I am allowed to run a little ahead of myself or not. The idiot's secret. What is it like to write well? Ode to the Highway House. Okay, calm down. Let's also say there is no need to write anything down for a while. Let's think back on all the poets that may have flirted in this room, or fucked, or tried to, or met often in semi-secrecy several times a week. For now, I feel silenced by the everyday I already told you, diseased and purposely kept from new love and old. And then Margaret dreamt that she and Barbara drove up through the desert 900 miles to leave cooked food in front of room 217. I call Lydia to say that Cosm is teaching a whole Naropa summer course on Yoko Ono. I hope this means a retelling of the Chamber Street concert series with Jackson McClough. This constructed attempt at poverty, so chic I can forgive, especially if real poets were there as specimens taking part. Any other poets that may have collapsed halfway down the hallway of the archive? The ones that barely made it, they make the rest of us smell so sweet, it becomes unreal. A lot of this longer poem is just imitations of writers I love. This is an imitation of Renee Char, Leaves of Hypnos. Yesterday, I was being paid to fight off the assertion that native thought and philosophy could lie down next to the bride of white theology. It didn't work the first time around, and now we have so-called allies crowding the entrance, an almost separate crusade. Lucidity is the wound closest to the sun. From Renee Char's war journal, Leaves of Hypnos, I think of Beckett and the last line in his translation of Apollinaire's Zone, sun, courseless head, or Roger Shattuck's take on the same line, the sun, a severed neck. Money is a war of the unknown future, forcing yourself to say yes out of fear that no other work will come. I now know that the poem, in all of its parts, will come forward to embrace the future. Last night, I decided to write my way out the door. I finally picked up on Louis Warsh's tone of voice. It was such a heavy, almost paranoid tone that it is still being filtered right now, like river water. 1980s reservation sonnet after Wanda Coleman. You are treated as a guest. We have drawn rings that determine where you should remain, meaning your whole life. We will pay for your health care and build spacious ghettos of entirely separate houses, eerily painted in watercolor. Ours was a soft chocolate brown. After Mom left, she sometimes called while on the road or sent postcards. I remember reading one all day in my bed with no second sheet. The Muppet Show in front of an orange velvet curtain. My sister Lydia would nod in response to Mom's questions from the road. Are you being good? The phone was indeed heavier then. The washer or dryer was always broken, and I knew enough not to ask which. I remember commodities and recipes that died in vain. How to bleach out the taste of a metal can. Fragment after Clark Coolidge. There are no floors and there is no coast, there is no when. A cul-de-sac from which the stone still lives entirely covered with snow. Cafe on the sodden marble, enclosed in dreams. Message from crystal lace, the spirit is in the shale wheel. A wall of yellow plates before the urge nearing solution. The shine on garnet, the cuff marks of speech. One crust, my limitless variable pitch. It's easy to pretend that it's beginning again. You learn to love the toggle and the witness, the ash staved into a wall. Back home from the hospital, the cat avoids me. I am a ghost of my former self. The carousing red middle of the kerosene lamp. The cat inches off the record player. I can hear a few nightbirds through the screen upstairs. I walk the hall and whisper John Wiener's lines from 707 Scott Street, those that failed me this morning. For I have looked down into the pit and turned away trembling. And this last little bit is Sappho. You die and fall through space to lie as an outline. Memory is a few shattered pieces lost. No lilies on earth were ever mine, plucked from a spring in secret. A rush of figures spring out from middle hell, the darkened faces that linger in back, wandering. Thank you.
Thank you, Cedar. Because I'm the program manager, Amy, I forgot to say that before, at Bloedel Reserve, I get to ask the first question. I figure that's a perk of the job, right? So I do have a question during this question and answer time. We'll go for about 20 minutes. And after I go, I want everybody to chime in, and I will, if it's hard for people to hear, I'll repeat the questions. So my question to Cedar, and I've been thinking about it a lot since meeting you, is at what point in your life did you know that words were what you did, that words were your magic?
Well, okay. Well, I think I just found a notebook, like a blank notebook that was black and hardback, and it was very attractive. And it was like sort of half full. I think it was like an abandoned notebook. And I think I was already drawn by the habits of being a writer. Like, oh, this cute little notebook. And I would write these like rhymed couplets, and they would often be about the animal life that I imagined outside my window, which is pretty much Totten Road, for those of you who want to know. and so it was a lot of that and a lot of like loneliness, you know, as a young person, and just having that notebook and a place to go. Because I think I'd read every book in the house, with the exception of like Stephen King or something. So, but by the time I started writing, so I think it was just learning the power of the imagination. And I didn't have materials, I didn't have fancy art materials to get it down. I didn't have a camera, but I had this notebook.
Oh, cool. Does anybody else have a question they'd like to ask?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, so can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know it's hard to tell.
First sentence out of your mouth, black, hardback, and attractive. And then later you said habits. Do you find yourself now speaking even in conversation in ways that rhyme? And if so, is that contradictory to some of the like more contemporary style poems where one might even go out of their way not to rhyme?
Well, you know, rhyme has its place. And like, you know, you find yourself like singing a contemporary song, like a genius, like hip hop song, and you're just locked in rhyme, right? And it gets stuck in your head. But to answer your question, I think I speak in poetry all the time. I think some of my best work has been spoken to you, you know, like just people, and they often say, oh, remember you said this to me? I do not remember, but I wish I had written it down often when they tell me what I said. So I think I just feel like a doctor, like I see poetry bleeding out all over the place, and I'm just rushing to try to staunch the bleeding with these statements and try to make, I love to talk to writers or painters, people that are just kind of open about their process, and maybe even tell me like what their process is like, as like difficult as it seems, or, you know, how do you draw out these habits and how do you make these habits your own? I don't know if that helps at all.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Yes.
You mentioned first reading Creeley when you were pretty young. I was wondering what your initial reaction was to it.
My initial reaction was I understand all of the words being used, so I loved it. And I always thought that instead of Emily Dickinson, who also does the same thing, they, like Creeley should be taught to young students. And what was revolutionary about him is I wish I had my little Bluetooth speaker, I would totally geek out and just play a Creeley recording. But since we're not in class, the thing about Creeley that I loved is his line would be about 4 syllables and he would stop just to make sure you knew that's how long and odd the line length was. And so you just would seem like this stuttering little mechanized poet. And it would seem, out of breath and violent to people who were expecting something more placid in the line to always land with more syllables almost. But again, to bring back the hip hop analogy, it's almost like leaving your imprint on the line. You know, how do you get what differentiates you as a poet from someone else? It's that kind of oddity made uncanny. And that's what personal style is, I think.
We have a question back here.
Hi, Cedar.
Hi. Who is that?
Paul Nelson.
Oh, hi, Paul.
Too soon after Joanne's death, or what stopped you from reading that piece?
Something like that. I mean, it's not soon. It's been almost 10 years. I don't know. I can't even talk about it. Can I have some water? But yeah, what about her? Yeah, let's get this over with. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I just wanted to know why you didn't read the piece. When you
It's that same piece that made you cry at just the beginning, you know, at
At the festival.
Cascadia. Yeah, but just the beginning. I don't know why. Because I love to talk about Joanne and like Cher. I can't talk about her right now. I don't know why. But yeah, sorry.
Any more questions? Yes, down here.
Because you can't talk about it because that's
Yeah, and it's inopportune. Yeah. Yeah. She would always tell me that. She would always laugh that when people said, "Oh, get over it," as opposed to go through it, like Dante's Inferno or something. The only way out is through, probably. Yeah. So, well, hi, Joanne. Yeah. But yeah, ask me something else. Oh my God. Yeah. Okay.
You do speak in poems. The composition of your poems that end up in the book, can you talk about how much of it just comes through onto the page in that way, or how much of it is kind of like
A weave or
constructed,
something, yeah.
arranged, stitched together? You know,
Yeah, that's definitely a good
is it
question.
like in an editing kind of mode, or using what's already there as like an
Yeah, maybe
starting
after
material or
the
something?
first day after you throw all the words onto the page. And then, because a lot of people, when you think about poetry and the way that it's taught, people think you just sort of vomit onto the page and then you're done. You've made your statement and then you maybe make some edits, but the sequencing is basically the same. You inherit the storyboard, but I like to alter that storyboard, almost like I'm an editor that stepped into a film and I have a bunch of footage, but I get to decide how that footage is used to its best impact. And at the beginning, I used a typewriter and I would retype my poems. And then I think that was so hard to like retype every draft that I trained myself to just write that way. So I was also, my mind was almost like a pair of scissors, you know? And then if I want to get very extreme with it, I still will alter things, but I don't do as much post. Now, it's more like I receive the collage. The collage is dictated. But sometimes as you get older, you get paranoid that, oh, I'm too understandable. You know, I've mellowed. So then you want to alter the work, but sometimes you end up giving it like a bad nose job. So, and then you have to wait that out, you know. So you don't want to do too much damage.
I saw a couple more questions out there.
Oh yeah, there was someone. Yeah.
What's your take on commissioned pieces? What types of commissioned works do you put out?
I love commissions because I love a deadline, and I like my imagination like narrowed. You know, I like people to be like, how about you write about this? You know, I like to focus and investigate. So I love a commission. And a lot of times, what I tell young writers is you'll get like a $3,000 commission to write a poem, right? And then you write that and then use that for something else too. You know, then I used that same poem that I got the $3,000 commission for and I put it in Ada Lamone's Poet Laureate anthology. And then because that was in this popular kind of normie anthology, now I have gigs based off that. You know, so you end up making money on these poems that you felt a little nervous to, you know, write or share from the beginning. So I have an odd career where I don't have a degree, for instance, but I have to. Sometimes I'll get published by the New York Times or in something like that. I have like this underground appeal, and then I have sometimes these crossover gigs, and those seem essential to making it to middle age. If you're not going to die at 27, you know.
In the middle, Cassie.
What is inspiring your work very recently, and also how was your residency at Bloedel Reserve?
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're kind of the same answer. I decided to use the 3 weeks to learn to write stories. So that's what I've been doing. And then immediately, you know, after Siren of Atlantis, the last work I was reading, then I started writing more prose poems. And then I just decided I wanted to try to write stories because they seemed to be happening. I was really interested in copying my reality. Like at the end of the day, I would be like, wow, it seems like I could just relive what I did today and embellish a few things and throw in a few tantalizing things. But basically it'd be almost like a a movie of the day with, you know, narrative sort of alterations. And once I figured out I could do that, I was like, oh, I can tell stories. Or there was also, in one of those stories, I collaborate with a poet, and then instead of writing this essay about collaboration, I just put in everything I thought about collaboration into the fiction and sort of fictionalized it. So it's all about packaging at this point, you know. When I think when you hit a certain kind of, it's like being a musician and being able to play all types of things, as opposed to, but people love to say, oh, you're a beat poet, you're a jazz musician, you're a native writer, but that's not actually true. I mean, I'm all those things, but they all kind of bore me in their static position.
Okay. Oh, one
Oh, yeah.
more.
How much of your inspiration is innate, something that you're born with?
Mm-hmm.
How much was your family involved in?
Well, my family would have loved it if I did what they did, you know, like music. But I did something totally boring and without money, so they love it now. Like post the City Lights book, they loved it. Maybe even before that, but I think for a long time it looked a little dangerous to them, you know. And I can see why. And now, yeah. Plus, it's just awkward when you're a poet and you live in an expensive city like San Francisco, and in order to subsidize your practice, I was working at a grocery store where we would share the profits. And so you were kind of locked into the situation. It was kind of like a golden handcuffs situation, because you could live. I had cheap rent in the Mission, and I could live off of a part-time job and have health insurance. But they all assumed I had given up this dream of being a writer, you know, and that it was a hobby. But they didn't realize I was climbing out for 15 years, you know. So that was kind of a shock when I left. And what was the question again?
How much is inborn and how much?
Oh yeah, I was going to talk about the important thing. Yeah, my family, they're real supportive and great. But like every day, you have to scare up and court inspiration, you know. And you do eventually lose that terrifying thing of, I have nothing to say, maybe that was the last poem I'll receive. You know, eventually that goes away, because, you know, you can watch something on YouTube, or you can, you know, scribble down something somebody said that's in your ear, or something you can't get out of your mind, or last night, you know, what happened maybe not last night is a blur, but that's good for writing, last night being a blur. Conflict is good for writing. Nobody wants to read about good sex. Bad sex is much better to read about, you know. So just learning all these kind of tricks to keep yourself inspired. But my family loved me, but I felt like they were worried. It wasn't a disapproving thing, but it was something that was like, poetry it can come across very sad in the early days. You know, it's unpaid, it feels self-proclaimed in some way. So it's very awkward, I would say. Yeah. Not now, but.
I think this will be one or two more is it, so go ahead.
Okay.
When you talk about writing poetry as a way of running around staunching the bleeding, I'm curious in this metaphor, what's the wound that caused all this beauty to spill out?
Well, was really talking about like saying things, speaking about poetry to staunch the bleeding, saying things to like inspire people to keep going. The bleeding, the wound is there are too many poets, and we have nothing immediately to hold your attention. No expensive painting, no bar with a band where you'll get laid at the end possibly. We overlay silence onto the proceedings, you know. So that can be awkward. It could be like, when do we view the fucking body? Why is it so dead in here? You know? And so it's a hard sell, you know? That's what the wound is, it being a terribly hard sell. And we lose a lot of poets, you know, because people start out and they feel invincible, and they start a magazine and they get their connections, and then they realize like people were maybe just using them for their great magazine. You know, you find out all kinds of things. Plus, poetry is not very well funded, so it's like you're in a big housing project, and there's not enough for everyone. And not to make it sound too glamorous.
We can do one more. Is there one more? Okay, we cannot do one more too. Oh, you have
yeah,
one
yeah,
over
let's
here?
do one more.
Great.
Yeah, but you have to laugh, because what's the other option? But I think that with teaching poetry too, it's almost like 30% stand-up comedy, and also doing the in-class writing with them and failing and reading your failures just like they have to. So a lot of times the position of the poet, they'll be like peevish and vaunting their privilege over you, but really they're kind of these like pathetic figures that you should meet eye to eye. Okay, that's a good ending.
That's a good one.